Hello there out in Radio Land, Internet Land. Welcome to the many, many copies of me. Let me know in the chat if you see me and how the sound levels are. And we'll get started. I'm just going to turn the music down a little bit on my side. And that might turn it down for everyone, so if it gets too quiet, just let me know. But it's supposed to be quiet. I want it to be just sort of background. Cool. Murfurter sees the Infinity Mare, which is as planned. Cool. So today we're going to be showing some One Deck Dungeon user interface stuff in Unity 3D. So that's going to be what's going on. The first thing I'm going to do is show the program that we use to capture stuff for the video, which is the game, but it's still pretty early stage. So let me go and see if I can do that. So I'm going to pause the music here and run that and see if that does what I want. So it's going to be a little small, but you'll get the gist of it. I guess I could, yeah. It doesn't quite do what I want. Oh, that's not what I want. Things are going to be a little mixed up. Let me just make it full screen anyways. This is what happens in development stuff. Sometimes things aren't quite exactly right. But yeah, so things will be a little mixed up on this version, but you should get the idea across. So we have our area here where we're going to explore. So we click on here to explore. We have this cool torch animation, lighting, and then when we want to open a door, we click on the one we want, and we have a cool walking through the dungeon animation. So, and then we get into this phase with the dice, and the dice roll, and all that cool stuff happens. And then you can use the dice to put them on the places and all that stuff. So this is sort of the rough demo that we've got to at this point, but it's not actually super complete. And what I'm going to do is show you some parts of how that stuff works, as well as do some actual work on moving things forward to hooking things up and making them work properly, getting some actual work done. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat. I've got the chat here on iPad, and I'd be happy to answer any questions as we go. So let's just go in, and I'll show some of if you're curious about how that stuff was done, we'll have a quick look at that. So if we look at our game view, this is our main view of the game. And this is similar to Bottom of the Ninth. If you followed some of those dev streams, it's a Unity 3D UI system. So we have a canvas and a bunch of panels with all the different parts of what's going on. Sanver says, not hearing the music. I can turn that up a little bit. Boop. Let me know how that is. And cool, so it's fairly quiet music, that's the idea. But if you can't hear it at all now, let me know. Yeah, so we have sort of those main things, but if if we run this, I've actually turned off those animations. So if we run the scene right now, it just sort of clicks right through without any animations. And so those animations are actually set up in separate scenes so that Jennifer could iterate on making those animations look cool without interfering with other work. And so let's have a look at the torch one first. So it's actually in 3D, so we'll want to find out where that is. Yeah, so the torch is there. I should have hooked up a mouse for this part, oh well. And then we have the doors are there as well. So this is sort of this is a 3D scene that has a Unity animation happening in it. And now the music stopped. All right, let's try just playing that. See what we get. Okay, so the torch is on the other side. We have to go around. There's the torch, it's a 3D object with particle effects, with the smoke and everything. And we can run its animator to have it do the thing that it does. So you can sort of recognize that in the game view down there of what happens in the scene. We can make this 4x3 because that's what we're set up for right now. So yeah, so what we do is we actually load this scene in and play it on top within that space. And similarly, we'll show the door opening. You can see here in the distance in the scene view, go towards that, that we have this door, and it's actually going to open up in a cool way, not just flip over like you might expect. And then secretly inside is the glooping ooze. So if we run this scene, and it's got animators on it as well. That's two separate animators. There's one for the door opening. So I think, yeah, if we turn on the door, you can see that animation. And then there's also the camera has an animation on it as well for it to move inside. And those actually go off at the same time when we start the scene. So if we want to test that, we could turn them on at the start of the scene. They're turned off so that when we load the scene, we can control when they start. This pop-up here is happening all the time. It's annoying. So yeah, so there you go. We're going in. And so one thing we're going to be doing, which we haven't done yet, is have a different graphic for each monster. That's going to be based on the card art for that. Jean-Marc says, my stream will have more fun things to look at. I guess so. It's kind of fun. Cool. So that's sort of what those things are working behind the scenes. And they're actually not in. I took the integration out in the scene here because I was working on doing some more integration with the engine. Because we've been working on the UI sort of a little bit backwards almost. We built out a lot of the stuff, a lot of the layout and a lot of the animations first before the engine was ready to be hooked up to. And so now we're sort of going back and hooking it up because we wanted to have some more cool stuff to show off for the Kickstarter, stuff we were going to do anyways, but we just did them first instead of last. So yeah, so let's, one thing I wanted to do today is do a little more on a card, because Jean-Marc was working on a skeleton card, and I'd like to be able to have that card show up in the game. So this is my card tester scene, where I can just have a card pop up. And so far I've got encounter cards. So encounter cards look sort of like this or like this. And they've got, the artwork and the title, but they've also got the challenge boxes and the loot. And so what I'd like to do is on this scene here, or on this card view, extend it out to have the challenge boxes on there. And then there's lots more stuff that we're going to get to, but this is something that's going to integrate directly in with what Jean-Marc's put together. So let's get to that. So far we just have the title being populated on this card. We see we have a title label here, and we have an image that gets loaded up from Sprite. And so, cool. So there's a question in the chat from Lochrist asking about why the card description started in JSON instead of scriptable object and prefabs. And the main reason for that is so that we can build the engine, the rules engine, outside of Unity. That's actually built without any Unity knowledge at all, or dependencies. And so we can have unit tests and console front ends to it, or whatever we want, and then we can load it up into Unity without having to do that other stuff in Unity. So it's basically the rules of the game don't actually need it to be a Unity game. And we could decide not to build the game in Unity if we wanted, and then the rules of the game would still be in the same C# DLL that we could use with any program. Another good reason we might want to use the rules engine on a server for some reason, so something to think about. We haven't done that, but that's a thing we could do. All right, so what I want to do is get the challenge boxes. So I've done a little bit with challenge boxes for which you've already seen, but they were all basically hard coded in that scene. So if let's go back to game view and have a look at it, because may as well. So there's some challenge boxes here, but these are prefab at least, but they're not being configured by code. They're just sort of hard coded in that they have these values. And so we want to be able to, pick up that information from the engine to display that. So let's go back to the card tester again. And we're going to want, so I'll go over a bit of how this is structured. So the card tester is just a screen. A lot of game development will have these sort of internal tools where the developers can work on stuff without having to go through the whole game. You can imagine if we had to play a random game of One Deck Dungeon until we found a skeleton card show up. That would be very inefficient. So we want to have a way that we can pull up any card whenever we want. We have the same sort of thing for Sentinels for Bottom of the Ninth as a developer tool, where we can then we can look and see what's going on and make tweaks. So in the scene side, it's pretty straightforward. We just have a panel and some UI controls for me to enter in what card identifier I want and edit those. On the code side, we can pull up the view controller code for here. What it's just going to do is whenever we put in an identifier, it's going to try to find a card with that identifier and create it. And I don't want to have to have a drop-down box where I have to tell what kind of card I'm looking for. I'm just going to basically try to look up all the kinds of cards it might be, and once I find one, then I found it. So it could be, basically at this point, it could be an encounter, it could be a dungeon, it could be a hero. So in these code lines here, and let me know if you need the font size to be bigger. These code lines here, I'm just looking up to say, is there an encounter with that identifier? Is there a dungeon card with that identifier? Is there a hero card with that identifier? If so, we'll use those to set up the game. We just set up a sort of a game that we just use to instantiate the card, so we can show it. And then here we're going to call show card onto our full card panel, and we can go and see what that does. So in here, we have this concept of card view types. John Mark probably talked about card types, which is is it an encounter card? Is it a dungeon card? Is it a hero card? The card view type is more about, is it a large view of the card? Maybe there's a different style of view. Like in Sentinels, you have small views or micro views, and that's going to determine what prefab we instantiate and populate. And we have this card view factory that's responsible for determining, based on the type, and then based on the view type, and based on the card view type, the card type, which prefab we're going to use. So it's still pretty early. We don't have a lot of these things filled in yet, but I do have a basic encounter card prefab that's getting loaded in. And if we go back to Unity, we can see where that is. So that's this one here, the encounter card front. We can, where's the prefab's not, oh, set in play mode, sorry. And we can select that prefab in the project here. Right now it just has background image, title, label, and card image, and we're going to add in some stuff about the challenge boxes. So that object, the card view, also has a class associated with it. We've got a basic card view that all card views are going to have a title and an image, but then encounter card views are going to have some more to them. So so we're going to put some more things in here. And actually, I think because we have dungeon cards, also have card boxes. A dungeon. I might actually put those challenge boxes in a different class, because the boss and the dungeon cards also have challenge boxes. Especially on the that side, they're very similar. The level card, this side of the card is going to be different. So we haven't really fully planned out what that's going to be. But maybe for now we'll just put it in the encounter card view, but I'll probably end up refactoring it out to be an intermediate level. So what we're going to want to do is have some sort of class that's responsible for for laying out and populating. Excuse me, I dropped a card. Laying out and populating these challenge boxes, because we don't want that logic should be encapsulated out into a different class so that it can be reused in different things. And so we can call that something like I don't know what John Mark calls in the engine. That's a good way to look at it first. So let's have a look at what we have there on the encounter card. So in the model we have cards, encounters, challenge. Right. So a challenge has challenge boxes. Cool. So an encounter has a challenge, and the challenge has boxes. So we want a challenge view then, I think is what we need. Lawchrist asks, are you able to share some code between Sentinels, Bottom of the Ninth, and One Deck Dungeon? Yes, we do have some common code that we share between them. More sort of utility stuff. And the thing that we probably share the most is sort of design concept as opposed to specific code. Because between games, like the games themselves are not that similar really in terms of their rule set. And so it's not like you can just sort of build One Deck Dungeon within a Sentinels-like engine. So it's more of using the same principles between the games. And then if there is like specific common code, utility functions or things like that we can reuse, we keep those in a common library that we share between them. Yeah, good question. Cool. So yeah, this idea of a challenge, I like that idea, and so let's make a view a view in here that relates to that. So we're gonna want we'll put it in the cards folder for now, and I'll create a script which is challenge view, and Unity will create that. We already have a challenge box view, I think. Yeah, here under controls. Maybe I'll make a folder for challenge because that's going to be shared by a few things. And then we'll move those things inside. We'll pull that code up. We'll put our namespace on there. And it's certainly going to use the controller, so we'll copy that in too. All right, so this challenge view, if we look at the cards and Jean-Marc's code, it's clearly going to have challenge boxes. Let's see what else we need to represent on there. Right, there's specific foe and peril, which are different challenges. And so we just need to, so the sort of different layouts that we see on perils, we have like two heading. We have a heading and then a challenge box, and then a heading and a challenge box. And maybe it could be any sort of, it's typically, I think, just a single challenge box per. And then for, for bosses or for foes, we've got, all kinds of different ways that the challenge boxes are set up. And they also have an effect, a monster effect there too. And I think that's probably part of the challenge. Let's see. Yeah, that's part of the challenge. So we'll make that part of the view area too. Is basically this whole square is going to be what's represented by this view. Come on. All right. Okay, so let's go back here and go to our basic prefab here, and we can create a place for this to go, and then when we start populating it, we'll start seeing stuff show up. So let's create a new panel in this space. And I'm just going to rough it in here, and Jennifer will come and make it look exactly right at a future time. So I'm just going to put it over here. And it's going to take up this space. Basically, we'll clean that up later. And we'll call this the challenge view. Cool. So I think the challenge view itself is going to be more of a generic thing that instantiates bits and pieces. Because if you see, like it's always composed of smaller parts. So the box itself doesn't have anything really to it except, it has an effect, and then it sort of has like almost a grid, but not really a grid of pieces. So let's work with that in mind. We'll add a component here, challenge view. And right now that doesn't have anything on it, but at least we've got something to start with. And we can apply the changes to that prefab. So we're going to need to create the bits and pieces. And prefabs are a great way for that. So if you look at, let's just start with the challenge boxes. If you look at the Wraith here, it has a bunch of challenge boxes. We already have a prefab for a 1x1 challenge box. And there's the 2x1 challenge box as well that we see. And so we can, if the challenge view knows about those prefabs, it can instantiate those prefabs and configure them based on the model. Lawchrist asks, which Unity plugins are you using for development besides TextMesh Pro? Yeah, we use TextMesh Pro for labels. Yes, the Wraith, but not the Wraith. We use a bunch of different things. We use Audio Toolkit to make handling sound effects and music really easy. We use, for dice, we use Dice Master, which is a nice plugin. A nice system for handling dice. We use Tweening with DoTween or HOTween. We use Hierarchy 2 for the editor, and just a few other various things. Not all the typical things we use are in here yet. Trying to think of what else we use. We use Lunar Console for mobile. We use all sorts of stuff. I can pull up Bottom of the 930 for Sentinels later, perhaps. Sentinels actually uses NGUI instead of Unity UI because Unity UI wasn't ready at the time we developed Sentinels, so that's a little different. Cool. So back to what we're talking about. So let's go and see what we have for challenge boxes actually right now. So if I instantiate this challenge box, what do we have here? So it's got the background image, and it's got a highlight image on it, a grid of consequences, which you can see there's various consequences that are shown in those boxes, and then a number label. And it has a view onto it, but you can see this is sort of, this is not really set up in the way that we like to do it. This is set up that I connect that it's all the data is there in the view, which is not correct. That was just what we did for the prototype sort of level stuff. So we're going to want to make that data-driven from the model and not something that, is just given. So let's go and just get that connection started through here. So what we want to do is have this know how to be set up with a challenge. Configure, and it should be given a challenge controller, and the encounter card view, we'll give it a reference to it, and we will have the encounter card view configure its challenge. Encounter controller, challenge controller. So this is going to tell the challenge view to configure itself based on that. And so what this code is going to need to do is look at the boxes that are, we're just going to worry about the boxes right now. There's the monster effect and other stuff, but the boxes are what we're worried about right now. So I think challenge itself has boxes, right? Challenge box controllers. So let's go through each of those. And each box is going to have things like the number on it and the consequences and that kind of stuff. So let's just put a log in here just to see that we're getting the right thing. Oop. And we're going to have a way to create those boxes and stuff. But with this, when we pull up, I put in enough here that when we configure the encounter card, we're going to tell that challenge view about the challenge controller, and it's going to at least print out what it's going to be doing. So with that will let us move forward. So let's, we need to hook it up though, because right now that's going to be null. And should be getting another property here in a second. Unless I got an error. Challenge view, there we go. So there's the challenge view. We'll apply that prefab. We'll just hide these for now. And let's run this. Cool, so we got a bunch of output, which is what I was expecting. So this is my box output. If we look at the skeleton, I had the skeleton here before. It'd be handy to have the card in front of me too, right? I believe it's the invisibility potion one. It doesn't matter really, they're the same on both. So we've got a magic 2 and a magic 4, and we see those coming here, then strength and strength and agility and strength. Cool, so that is what I'm expecting. So let's, now that we know our code is getting the right information, we can set those things up. So the challenge view needs to know how to make a challenge box. So let's tell it. Let's give it a property of the prefab that it can instantiate to make a box. So I think we're going to have basically probably two kinds. We're going to have the 2x1 size, and we're going to have the 1x1 size, because they're pretty different. They're going to be the same, have the same code driving them, but they're going to be different prefabs. So we'll call this the 1x1. Oh, that's a weird variable name. We'll call it box 1x1 prefab. Yeah, you can't, starting a variable name like 1x is going to cause weird problems. And then we'll have a 2x1 prefab. And cool. So now, instead of just logging this out, we can actually create that. So we can say the view is instantiate the box 1x1 prefab, and we'll just use our own transform as a parent for now. We might want to put it into a subview or something later. Yeah, so that right now is just going to create a bunch of boxes that do nothing. We'll add we're going to want the challenge box view itself to know how to configure itself. So it's important that the challenge view here at this higher level shouldn't have to know about what each box has or how to set up each box. It's the box's responsibility to know how to do that. So all this at this level, we just need to say, all right, we've got a challenge box object. Hey, challenge box view, set yourself up with it. We don't need to care about the label or the stuff at this level. It's down at the challenge box level that it needs to care about that. So that's a good way to separate your concerns out and make sure that your code is separatable and easy to maintain. So yeah, some of the code in here is kind of the hard-coded stuff that we did for the pre-alpha, so don't worry too much about it. A lot of this stuff is going to be replaced when we're hooking up to the engine properly, which is what we're starting to do right now. So let's give this a configure method and give it a challenge. Ooh, I didn't have to include the right namespace here. It doesn't know about that yet. It needs to be given a challenge box controller. And then at this level, we can do things like set our label and stuff like that. You can notice that we actually don't even have a connection to the label here yet. And we'll log this here just to have another output. And here we can tell the view to configure with that box. Cool, so let's go and see. What we should see when we do this is we'll get a bunch of box objects appearing. They won't be laid out properly or anything, but they'll start appearing in a way that we might be happy with at this point. So we do have to tell it about that prefab. Because right now it doesn't know about those. So let's give it the 1x1 challenge box. And we'll apply that. And then when we run it, we should see box on top of box on top of box. Hey, look. It did create a blank box that looks just like the prefab because we didn't actually do anything to it. If we look at the card that got created here, we've got 6 challenge boxes. They're just all laid out on top of each other, so you can't really see that, but they are there. I'm just moving them around. So we just need to now actually set them up with what they're supposed to have. And so we can do that by adding those properties. And I'm going to make a note here, like remove these properties. Because these are basically, this is something you don't want to have. You don't want to have data in the view level at this. You want to have the data down in the model level. So let's, is the stream stuttering or is it just you? Actually, I don't know. So what OBS says, it says doing okay there. Right, so what I want to do is have things to hook up in order to configure that box with what it is. So we want to have the number. That's a pretty important thing. So we will text mesh pro UGUI is the class name for that. If you're playing a video game and watching the stream, then all bets are off, Takewalker. So that's the number label. And we have, we're going to have a grid for the consequences. We can have a consequence grid. And we're going to have the other thing that's sort of the main thing that we see in here is the background color is the type of box that it is. And so there's the different dye types, and then there's also gray ones. And so we need to be able to replace that image and we'll call it background image. We place that image with the right one based on the die type. And so in order to do that, we're going to also want to have a way to decide to have those images, the sprites, available. So we'll have a sprite sheet, sprite atlas, and that's in another namespace, engine.u2d. And sprite atlas, and we'll call this background image atlas. Okay. Yeah, so these things are actually part of the data, and we don't want them there. As well as like this stuff is more temporary. But here we can configure based on this box. We have the box's value, which I think that's the number, unless there's another one that is number. Number of dice, number of cards. Let's say it's value, and we'll see if it looks right. So the number label is going to be the box's box value in string form. And the consequences, we're going to need to iterate over those and we're going to have to, again, instantiate stuff for those. But fairly simple things. They're just simple sprites. They're not going to be complicated. And then we also want the background image, which is basically die type. And it doesn't always have one, so we can say if the die type has a value, we need to update the background image. But if it doesn't, we'll just leave it as the gray, because if you look at yeah, there are gray ones that show up on level cards. So if the die type has a value, we're going to want to look up the sprite we want in the atlas. So we don't actually have an atlas for that yet, so we can set that up first before we go and do that. Another thing we want to do is have those layouts so they're not just all on top of each other. And we're going to have to do something more smart about that, because it's not just a simple grid. As you can see, there's some more to it. But for now, I'm just going to put a grid component on that, and that will just make it show up nicely. So if we go to the challenge view and we add a grid layout on there. Oh, we're compiling. Spinning, and we're spinning. Streaming is a tough job, this computer. Let's just add a grid layout. The nice thing about layout stuff in Unity is it's really easy to play around with stuff. And we'll just set it 65 by 65, and it should work for us. So we need to apply that on there, and then we also need to hook up those things we set up on the challenge box. So we've got the number label to hook up, and the consequence grid, and the background image is just the same thing, but it could be a subview. And the background atlas we haven't set up yet, so let's do that. We should at least see them show up in a grid and have different numbers on them. That's the goal. Hey, and so we got 2, 4, 3, 5, 5, 6, which is progress. So that's good. Now let's see if we can get those background images going the way we want. So to do that, we're going to have to set up a sprite atlas. So this is a relatively new, sprite atlases are not a new concept, but there's a new way to do it in Unity 2017 that we're using now. You would go on to here and you'd set a packing tag, and then you'd have to make some other way to reference your sprites. But now there's a new, better way to do it. And I'm going to actually name these things based on the die type so that I can just sort of directly pull. That image is vibrating. I don't know if you can see that. It's really weird. I'm going to name that for the die type so I can directly go based on the die type. So I'm going to call this, actually I'm going to make a folder so I can just have things named exactly how I want. 1 by 1. Let's put all the 1 by 1s in there. And this is going to be called magic. And none. And agility. And heroic. No, strength. Locrist asks, do you prefer the Unity new UI system to NGUI? Definitely prefer it quite a bit. It's much more principled. NGUI is like, coming from a background of working with native iOS apps, NGUI to me is really clunky, and like it does the job, but it was like sort of, we had to use it because it was the only thing that was decent enough. Like every other UI system we looked at was worse. And so, you know, it was sort of the best of the worst. And it has some good things about it, but it's a lot of hacking around to get things to work the way you want. The new UI system is much more well thought out and much better integrated with the system. It still has some issues, but it has the the weight of Unity behind it, and it's open source too, so it gets improvements from the community. But yeah, like I can definitely see how coming from a background without any UI toolkit, if you were like using the immediate mode or hard code or coding your own interface, NGUI is amazing. But coming from Apple's native iOS UI, it was like, really? But we made it work, and but we're much happier to work with the new UI system in the new games. Cool. So I've got my challenge boxes here, and now I'm going to create a sprite atlas with these. So I'm going to create. You can now just go and create an atlas as an asset. Before you had to it was sort of an asset, that a mysterious asset. So we'll call this a 1x1 challenge box atlas. And we will inspector lock and drag these on here. And you can set up options here, but I don't think we need to worry about those right now. So now this sprite atlas will have those boxes in it. We might actually want to end up having, something different, but for now, that seems good. Yeah, we could. There's only so many of these that these maybe should just go. I'll go in one. But for now, let's just do it this way, and I'll probably revisit it. So on the challenge box, we can give it that atlas. What I was thinking was that we could, have one atlas for the 1x1s, and then a different atlas for the 2x1s. But they're all in the same card, so they should probably be in the same atlas. So, you know what? I'm just gonna go ahead and do it better right now. So I'm gonna prefix these with their size again, and this is you can see my brain working. Well, I don't know if you can see it, but you can hear it. Changing my mind and redesigning something. So we're going to just call this the challenge box atlas. And we're going to include the size of it so that we can look up the sprite by that. So we'll call this 2x1 magic. And these sprites are actually too big. They can be smaller, but we'll resize them. That's just resizing the images. And that's not yellow, it's strength. And this isn't really a challenge box, it's just a blank box, but that's fine. So let's put those ones in there as well. We're not actually going to use them today. I don't think we'll get to that, but we can see how they pack up in there. So now the atlas has more in it. Cool. So we just renamed stuff, so that should still be hooked up here to the challenge box. Cool. And yeah, this I need to keep it active because it's used in the other scene a lot. John Mark sees John's brain. It's true. Okay, so we're not actually using that yet. What we need to do is go in here. So what I'm going to do here is actually add another, well, let's see. The challenge box object probably tells me how big it is, right? Box dot size, box dot. Here's where I try to figure out John Mark's namings. Can accept more dice? No, that's going to be sort of a temporary thing. See if I can get this before Jean-Marc right to the answer. Is dice pool? I think that's what that is. Oh wait. Is multi-box. There we go. All right. So the prefix is going to be, is it a dice pool? Or sorry, is it a multi-box? It's going to be either 1 by 1 or, and actually I want the opposite. So if it's a multi-box, I'm going to use a 2 by 1 sprite. If it's the other, I'm going to use a 1 by 1 sprite. And then we're going to look up the sprite by that prefix plus the die type. And then we're going to set it. So background image equal dot sprite equals sprite. And so this should get us our nice colored boxes. Let's give it a try. Good thing I have my engine programmer in the chat. Cool, look at that. We've got magic boxes and strength boxes and agility and strength. So that's looking pretty good. We don't have the consequences on there yet, but we've got the numbers and we've got the types. That's looking pretty good. So let's see if we can do those consequences. So the consequences are a little different because you can have more than one. If you look at the skeleton, for instance, there are some boxes that have 2 things on them. If you look at the bosses, they often have a lot more, like they might have other things. And what I'm seeing actually on hopefully the video is coming through. It got dark out here. Let me just turn on a light and then let me know if I still look okay. It's actually 2 rows of consequences and not a grid as it happens, because you look at this challenge box, it's got a row of hearts and then a row of time, whereas the bosses have a row of hearts and then a skull or not. What else do we got? See, there are things that the engine doesn't really care about, like how you show the consequences. It just cares that there are consequences. But if I look at these cards, I can see that it's not super consistent all the time, but you definitely have 2 rows and instead of a grid. And so that's what we're gonna, I think, instead of having grid, because we could still have a grid, but it's a little more tricky because the Unity grid really wants to be like a pure grid. It doesn't want to do something like, if you look at this, where one row has 2 things and the other row has 4. that's not a thing that the Unity grid system is made for. It would want to even them up, or it wouldn't want to do both of those things, that's for sure. So let's have a look at what we can accomplish with the grid here. Because we can constrain it to say there's a fixed columns or fixed rows. We can say there's 2 rows, but you can't tell it to go to the next row. Basically, it needs to like get to the end and then jump down. So what we could do is basically put in blank cells so that we can, we could accomplish something like the first box here, the climb around. And actually, I can actually do this on the thing that we're looking at, the challenge box. So if we look at the challenge box, we've got a grid in here. And if I duplicate this, you can see that it's building up in that way. But we're actually going to want it to go horizontally. So let's change this to layout horizontally. And so now if I add another shield, it's going to go across. And I can say that we're only going to have 2 rows. So it's not going to super matter with this small cell. You can see even then it wants to build it down like that, but I don't want that. I want this to be vertical. No, it wants to do that. Yeah, so it might be, the thing is we could stick with a grid and try to make it work that way. Or we could basically have either 2 grids or 2 layouts that just each go horizontally. Let's have a look at what is in the data here. Because there's some weird things like if there's only a time in a cell, it's in the top left. But hearts, I guess hearts go first and then time. But there's always a new line if there's a heart. Except, and what is even happening here with the ogre? Ogre's like, I'm just going to do a line break. These are some of the things that we need to deal with when we're doing a digital version, because all these cards are laid out by hand. And so we need to have a program that can lay them out in a way that looks good and hopefully matches up with what the original design intent was. And oftentimes it doesn't have to match exactly. So yeah. So you know what? I'm not going to worry about the exact layout for now. What I'm going to do is just add stuff to the single grid we have, and we'll worry about the exact layout of how it looks later, because the main thing is we want to get the information on the screen, and we can worry about those details. So the consequence box, or the consequence grid, we have a few different images that can show up there. We have a defense, we have time, all these different icons, not all of them, but a bunch of different icons can show up. So let's just go into the data and see about adding them in here. So on that box object, let's look for the consequences. We have consequence skulls, consequence time. I think there's a property about it being armor. So the first thing we're going to do, I don't even know if there's any armor boxes that also have consequences. But if there are, we can handle it. So if the box is armor, we're going to add add an armor consequence, which isn't really consequence, Oh, it looks like I ran out of music. I could just play more One Deck Dungeon songs, I guess. Sure. JCC says, darn non-standardized designs. That's just something you have to deal with. If you've seen Sentinels, there's flavor text is one of those things that we spent a good amount of time basically building an algorithm that could render the flavor text fairly well because it's actually text that's in like a circular or an ellipsoid space, that's put there by hand by Christopher or Jennifer, and but we need to, most of the time show it in a programmatic way. But there are some that we just can't, like turret mode's flavor text is completely filling the space and cut off at the edges with Buddha, 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 Buddha. Or Ra has a flavor text that's like hieroglyphics, and there's a couple others that basically we just have a way to provide an image for the flavor text because we can't do everything. So that's the sort of thing you need to have some flexibility with. You have to find the point where, do your best to build it within the system, but don't go crazy. At some point you can say, we're just going to do this in the less ideal way. Take Walker. No, John, you are the dungeons. I don't know that reference. Sorry. So let's get back to this. So consequences. Right, so we have just integers here for skulls, time, and wounds. So what I'm going to do is add a little function that's going to help us. So one thing to think about here, the consequence grid could be like its own class. Like we have the challenge view that makes boxes. And so the challenge view isn't concerned about the boxes because each box has its own stuff in it. So we could, in theory, inside here, the consequence grid could be its own consequence grid view and be in charge of creating each consequence item. But they're so simple, they're just an image, that I think we're not going to worry about separating that out. We can still do that in the future if we want. But for now, I'm just going to let the challenge box view be concerned about that and know about that detail of itself, even though it's something you could potentially do. And that's another thing that with experience, you have some idea of how deep down do you want to build your code, and where's the point where you don't sort of make everything as generic as possible. And that just comes with experience, learning about that. So keep at it. So let's here make a function that's going to help us just, instead of each, duplicating code in here, to add skulls, to add hearts, to add time or whatever, we're going to just have a function here to add consequence icon. And we'll just have a string for there's probably there might be something for that. String kind. And we'll say how many. I don't know if there's an enum for what boxes can show up, because in the engine, like, armor is like it's not a consequence, it's actually something else, so it's probably not really considered in here, like icon type. So for now I'm just gonna put a string in here, but we might make an enum or something. Oh, and this needs to have a type. So here we're going to add a consequence icon of, and we could just call that add, consequence icon, whatever, we can rename it if we want. So that's going to be armor, and the default is 1. And then we can just add the icons for each type. So we can add consequence icons for hearts, health, for wounds, and we're going to do that for the other two types. For time and skulls. And those will match up with whatever the name of those graphics are, which I don't know yet. But we'll fix those if needed. So here we want to add a new icon. And I think it makes sense to have a prefab for that. So let's make, and that's just going to be an image. Like, there's not going to be anything else to it. Is a, I guess we could just, you can just instantiate a game object, like, and not even worry about that. you can do, it's not instantiate though, you have to do like create a game object. It's a different, yeah, I don't like doing that. I'm gonna make a prefab. I feel better because then I can have other options on the sprite if I want. So it's still going to be an image, and it's going to be a, I don't like calling it consequence, not all consequence, let's call it icon image prefab. And we'll do this. So, and I'm just going to rename this with my refactor tool, and we'll just call it add icon. Yeah, you can just do new game object and then add a component, but yeah, prefabs are the way, like, this is one thing I've learned in Unity is like doing things the way Unity wants you to is overall going to be better for you in the long run than trying to fight it and do things your own way. And that's something that if you come to Unity from other programming, there's a lot of weird things, like you don't have access to the game loop, right? You don't have access to a lot of low-level stuff. You just have to sort of let go and let Unity manage those things and work within its systems, and you can be a lot more productive. So let's instantiate icon image prefab into the grid. And I still called that consequence grid, but maybe we'll call it icon grid now. Yeah, Locker points out it is tough to have Unity manage everything, but it does. It overall makes it easier if you do. And that's something we learned building Sentinels, and it took some time to get into that mindset. And then here we can say the image sprite is icon. Oh, actually, we need to have an atlas for that. And icon image atlas. Icon image atlas get sprite by the kind. Cool. So, and actually here we want to just do it that number of times. Whoops. So we'll make as many as we're asked to. And then we can worry about arranging with a blank line or whatever, like that can come in later. Cool, so we've built in a bunch of stuff in the code here that we need to hook up again back in Unity. So this is sort of the cycle that you do when you're working with Unity, is you do a bunch of stuff in Unity, go into the code, then hook things up, or vice versa. Maybe you get an error and you need to fix it. That happens. Oh, right, I passed the wrong parameter. This needs to be a transform. And so this consequence grid is going to go away, and actually I may as well rename that to icon grid. Icon grid. And the icon grid is actually what's going to control like the size of that sprite and stuff like that, but we might want to control, various elements of the properties of the image. And it's easier to do that and maintain that in prefabs and in scenes. Like that, this is one thing that Unity, like it helps to buy into Unity in this way, is having your configuration and stuff be stored in prefabs and scenes as opposed to in code. Because it's much quicker to iterate by changing values here than by going back to the code and changing and wait for a recompile if you want to be iterating on things like that. If everything was in code, it would just be much slower to do. So, all right, so where are we here? So we lost our connection here, so we need to hook that back up. And so we need an icon atlas and we need an image prefab as well. So these icons are way too big, but we'll need to make some small images for them. But I'll just make an atlas here so that we can have something happen on the stream, Lockrest asks, are you always using Sprite Atlas or have you used external tools like Texture Packer? We have used other things in the past. This is actually the first time we're using the new Unity Sprite Atlas system. We have used the old one, which uses the packing tag. Bottom of the ninth uses that, which is, it works fine, but it doesn't, like, you have to also then have another mechanism for having access to those sprites, whether it's, you know, direct connections, or we use a system that lets us generate like sprite libraries that just reference into the sprites. In Sentinels, it uses NGUI Atlas generator as well. So, and we actually, back in the days of Uncle Slam, we used Texture Packer, and that was built with Cocos 2D. I don't feel like there's much need to use something like Texture Packer when you have Unity, but it's still, people still use it because it's a little more advanced. But the new system seems to be working well. We haven't obviously deployed it yet, but so far so good. So we're going to call this icon Atlas. And this is probably going to end up being something we use a lot. This says defense. I'm going to rename it because I want it to make sense. And I'm going to call this skull. So I'm just going to put the icons in that we care about, which are going to be the skull, and time, and health, and armor. But yeah, with these are not optimized, and there's definitely some stuff that's not arranged here properly, but it's still early days. So, oh, I still have inspector lock. So we've got that atlas. Let's put that right there. And then for the image prefab, we just need to make a really simple image. So we'll just make one. And we'll call it a challenge box icon. And even though this is going to be controlled by the grid, I'm going to set it up in the same way. So yeah, and we'll save that as a prefab. And then we will put it in here. And you have to get it from over here. Challenge box icon. All right, so let's apply that. And let's see what happened. I think we've hooked up everything. What could go wrong? At least I know one thing that's going to go wrong. So, hey, look, things are happening. We've got graphics popping up. That's interesting. We've got the heart tucking into the time icon. That seems to be a problem with the sprite packer. And we also got, they all have a armor because that initial armor icon is actually part of the prefab, which we're going to get rid of here in a second. So what is happening with that image is, yeah, that packing is not good. I'm going to go ahead and say that packing is not good. And let's just see what it's doing here. So it tucked it into that because it's trimming it. Well, if we undo tight packing, I think it's trying to be clever and pack them in more tightly. Yeah, that was going on there. It's like, oh, there's blank space there, we can put something in, but maybe not. Maybe don't do that. All right, and so let's go ahead and in this challenge box, we don't want to start with an icon. So yeah, Locker says, much too clever. I don't even know why you would ever want that. Cool. And actually this icon grid doesn't need to have an image. That's causing it to look weird. And cool. So let's apply that. And I wish there's a hotkey to save project too, because or just always save the project. Now we should see things show up the way I want, except without necessarily the line breaks that we want, but you know, that looks pretty good. Let's see, where's my skeleton? We've got armor 2, armor 4 magic, 3 and 5 with the right things, and then 5 and 6. Oh, but the 6 has 2 time, but it's only supposed to have 1. But I bet that's not my fault. Let me look at the other one. I mean, it could be that this is a change in the rules, and I have the old printing of the cards. It could be that skeleton was changed to have 2 time there. But that's what the engine is telling me, so. Locust asks, would it cause a problem for Asmadi if you would enforce the placement of boxes? I mean, we try to make it look exactly the same as the original card if we can, but in terms of gameplay, like it doesn't matter where the boxes are. So you'll notice that it is lining up the boxes with an extra column here, which is just something because I didn't control for that. If I just make this view a little more narrow, or if I tell it to constrain with 3 columns, that'll take care of that. I think the skeleton might have been changed. So here now we see the boxes are in the right size grid. And maybe we're going to want the grid size to be a little bigger. Like if we say we want, like we're working off a full card size here, which is, I believe, 700 by 500. So that 65 by 65 was for a different context. And so we're probably going to want these to be a little wider, like 80 or even 90 by 90. Maybe even like 100, not quite 100, 95 by 95, say. And then the prefabs aren't really set up for that right now. But you can see we can play with those sizes and hook them up, right? Oh, Jean-Marc says the 6 box has 2 time in the latest version. Well, there you go. Cool. So yeah, so I think that's looking pretty good. Let's make sure to save our work here. We'll save the project. And that stuff I was just playing with the size was just in the play mode, so it doesn't save. And yeah, I still need to determine what I want to do there in terms of layout at this size, but we have things showing up in a functional way. We've got the challenge boxes showing up. We still don't have the effect. That's another element of the challenge. And then of course there's the other types of challenges, like the force, the perils, and the boss fights and stuff. But yeah, and then we've got the other elements on the card that we're going to get to. But you can see a little bit of setting up a card here, and let me save that work, and maybe we'll have a little bit of time to look at something else. Mimitone forgot to save once and abandoned an entire project as a result. That's not fun. Also, if you're working in Unity, or if you're doing any programming at all, you should definitely be using source control, such as Git or SVN, or basically anything is better than nothing. Lets you make sure not to lose your work and see how things have progressed. You can go back and see when changes were made, and you know, it's both if you're working on your own or if you're working with others. It's a basic tool that every developer should know how to use. All right, so I'm going to write a commit message about what I'm doing here. So implement initial work on challenge view for foe encounters. And so another thing to want to do is when you're doing a commit, usually like to make sure that I'm committing what I meant to. So I have a look at some of the diffs and make sure that, so when I'm adding a new file, obviously there's not much to that. But if I'm changing a file, then I want to make sure that I didn't accidentally commit the wrong thing. And if you commit, the nice thing about source control is if you commit the wrong thing, you can easily undo it. All right, so that is that. Let's see, I've got about 15 more minutes in my scheduled time here, so I'm going to see if there's anything else that I want to have a look at. So yeah, we got the challenge boxes. I think that's done enough to check it off here. There's still going to be some more to improve, but there's going to be still lots more to do, but that's a good start. Yeah, I was thinking of getting that torch animation hooked up because I wanted to demonstrate that workflow. It's because it's that's the first time we've done, well, we have done multi-scene stuff, like in Bottom of the Ninth. The background with all the animated characters and stuff is a separate scene that gets brought in, but doesn't really interact with the other scene a whole lot. It mostly just sort of gets notifications about things that are happening and then updates. Whereas like the animations that we're doing here are a lot more integrated. So let's go back to the game view, and I took out the animation integration. I'm going to see if I can restore it, at least quickly, so you can sort of see how it hooks up. Because before, in the previous demo, and what you see in the Kickstarter video was a little more hard-coded, just because the engine wasn't ready to hook up to, so we sort of built that animation sequence. But now, if you can see in the log here, I'm logging out all the actions and activations that are happening. So it's actually, it's being driven by the rules engine now a lot more. So when we click, it does the explore. It tells the view, which doors are there now. And those actually, if I look in the hierarchy here, I've named these. So, these are based on, the exact cards that are there. And if you click on one, it pulls up that one. Though I don't know if that was really, maybe it really was a glooping ooze. I can't remember if that label is hooked up yet. These boxes are definitely not hooked up yet. But so those animations aren't in because I took them out to simplify it. So let's see, I have a few more minutes. We can see if we can hook that up. It's a bit of a context switch, so we'll see. So let me pull up the game view controller. So all the code that I had in here is still here for doing those animations. And I've just been reorganizing stuff to be a little more principled from that earlier code. So before, what it was doing, this is all the real code here. But down here is all the gross code. I mean, it's not that gross. But here here's where we're loading for the Explorer. So we actually are loading that scene that I showed you earlier with the torch. And we load it up, and we find there's an animation controller. And the animation controller is just a simple class that I can call to say start the animation. This is really all it does is runs the animation, but it's going to need to do more because if you imagine in One Deck Dungeon, you might have like a couple open doors, and or some you're only exploring 2 doors or 3 doors instead of 4. So right now this animation just shows all the doors, but we need to be able to control a little better. And so right now it's very simple, but we're going to be expanding it. So let's see. So then what this thing did is ran this Explorer coroutine, and you can see here we're just advancing the hourglass manually, but that's going to be controlled by the engine again shortly. We play a sound effect, and we run the animation. Do these extra things. So these things are now being done in a different place now, and so what we want to do is like take this stuff that's doing this animation and bring it in to the place where we want it. So where is that happening? We can go and look into the log here and see. So we get, we get different actions. So let's start off from the start. So the first thing when we start the game, we have no cards in play. So the first thing we're going to need to do is, so these move card actions here are actually saying that's time passing. They're moving from the deck to the discard. And then we end up with an explore activation, which is basically waiting for you to click in this area. And when you do that, the engine is going to move forward and put the cards there. So when I click, I do the activation, it deactivates, and then it moves cards from the deck over to the area. And so that's what's happening sort of in the rules of the game. In the view, what we're going to want to do, what we do is, we light up the cards, but we want to do that torch animation first. So let's see if we can restore that in here. So we handle that with the, and I think, do we get an action specifically? We do get an explore action. So it's not like I just did this yesterday or something. So here we have the exploration panel is in charge of sort of all the stuff that happens during the exploration phase, where you're looking for doors or opening doors, and then it moves into an encounter section. So if we go to the exploration panel, we just have I sort of have a comment here that says I want to play the torch animation. So let's do that. So we can go to, and I think we don't need, we have this separate step where we load the scene and whatever, but I think it's pretty small, so we can just load it right away. Where did load explore scene? All right, I'm gonna have a better way to get these, to get this stuff, but for now I just want to bring it in here so you can sort of see how it connects. So we don't actually have the scene manager. Engine.scene management. And right. Let's just do this here. We're in a coroutine here, so we can do the torch thing and then wait and then continue. So we don't need to necessarily store state about that here. And right now it's loading this testing scene, but we'll promote that to a real scene very soon. Cool. So we're getting the animation controller, and then let's do the rest of the thing that it was doing, which was playing a sound effect. Sure. Running the animation, lighting up the background color. Then it was showing the doors, which is what I already have there. So here's where we're actually, looking at the actual information that's coming from the action to decide to light up the doors. Whereas before it was just sort of doing it. Now we're actually looking at what we're being told about. And the same thing with the torch. The torch is going to need to know about some of that stuff too, to be able to only show the doors that need to be shown. And here we need to use tweeting. But for now, let's do this. So, and then we'll wait for the animation here. And we can remove the scene. This is probably not going to look perfect, but let's do this part here. So we're just going to do the torch animation and then light up the doors, because these methods aren't actually doing an animation yet. But I just wanted to show, even if you sort of do something in a prototypey way, you can still bring that code in and then refine it. You don't necessarily have to throw it out. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to get to finish it today, but I want to show you we can actually start bringing this code in, put it into things in a more principled way, and then remove the old copy of it, but we still have a starting point that is good. So I think this is going to get our scene animating in a basic way, and then there's some more that we're going to do on that, but just wanted to have a quick demonstration of how that is working. And we can see how it works in the editor too here, which you don't see in the build. All right, so we're in quiet here. So if I click, hey, look. So you can see that sort of didn't quite transition all the way, but it had the animation there. So I'm gonna pause it in the middle, and we can see what's happening in the middle of that. Cool, so let's bump out to 3D and see, where is the torch? I don't even know. It's not even here. Okay. So we have with multiple scenes, you can click around and see where they are. So the torch, oh, it's like way off in Nowheresville. So that's kind of one of the neat things about Unity is you can have multiple cameras. And so, there's a camera that's looking at this. So if I right click on, you have right click, I think there's a hotkey for this. Align view to start, it isn't a hotkey for that, sure. So this is what that camera is showing, and it's showing that on top of the UI, but allowing stuff to come through alpha, because you can see this is not blocking the whole thing, so we can still see the background image there. If I hide this, if I turn off this camera, that front stuff just goes away, right? And what we're going to do is like crossfade between the doors so that there's no jump, it just sort of looks nice. Yeah, so that's sort of how you can use multiple scenes to have cool effects without necessarily having your main, because this torch animation is just used in one part of the game. It doesn't need to be, that stuff doesn't need to be loaded all the time. It doesn't need to be in here all the time. It makes it easier to coordinate working, because someone can work on improving that animation in the separate scene without having to worry about if someone else is working in the game view scene. So being able to split that stuff up is helpful, and that's what the approach we're looking at, that we're doing for One Deck Dungeon here with the animations, which is working pretty well. Cool. So I think that's going to be about it for the dev stream today. We looked at the overall UI organization and stuff, and got the skeletons challenge boxes put together, which is cool. And yeah, we were showing some of that animation integration. So as you can see, we're still got lots of work to do. And if you haven't backed the Kickstarter, please go and check it out, and you can help us make the game even better. It's funded, but we definitely want to get through to some stretch goals and get some more content into the game for you folks. So if there's any more questions, I can probably take a couple. Otherwise, it's going to be the end of the stream. Cytosine says thanks. You're very welcome. I am happy to serve. Yeah, so we're going to actually be having another dev stream every week. So next Wednesday, we haven't decided exactly what it's going to be yet, but it could be potentially some more graphics and animation with Jennifer. It's one of the ones we want to do where Jennifer can show you more of the graphics handling, as well as how she built those animations and other stuff. We also potentially might be able to do one around music with Jean-Marc and BeatScribe. We'll see if we can try to organize that. And we also can always do more programming. So that is, we can always just have our screens on and talk about what's going on in our programmer brains sometimes. Cool. So glad that you could join me, and thanks for watching. And oh, a quick question. Good. From Lockrist. Rules engine versus controller. The rules engine doesn't know a thing about game sequencing, no coroutine. The controller drives the game using the rule engine. Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. So, and it's a different, we do it differently in Sentinels and in the new games. So in Bottom Ninth and in One Deck Dungeon, in the rules engine, if you're familiar with model view controller, the rules engine has the model and the controller. So it knows about the data that makes up the game, and it knows about the rules of the game and how things change. And the view is concerned with displaying stuff and user interactions. But the view is in charge of telling the engine to move forward. But what the engine actually does when it moves forward is up to the engine. And we use a pattern that we've developed where there are actions that whenever something changes in the game, like a die moves or damage is taken or a card moves or whatever, that's an action that the view is told about, so the view can draw something or play an animation or update a number or whatever. So that's sort of one half of it, and the other half is activations. When the rules engine needs information or needs to know what the user wants to do, it sends out an activation that says, there's something that's available to be done. Whether it's you could put a die somewhere, you could take an action in the game, and the game engine doesn't care what the view is. It could be anything, and the view is concerned with, if I have that activation, am I going to draw a button? Am I going to, activate a control? Am I going to, whatever, play a sound and highlight and do, jump up and down? And whenever the user does the thing, it tells the engine and then, moves the engine forward. So that's sort of separation there. If we go back to Sentinels, when we first developed it, we're really concerned about the deep tree of reactions that happen in Sentinels. So in Sentinels, you can play a card that deals damage that, causes something else to happen, that causes something else to happen, that causes a dynamic siphon to be dealt damage, that causes someone to use a power. So you can have these huge trees of interactions that happen. And so we actually did accomplish that with coroutines, that the logic goes straight from the view, like the view runs coroutines that traverse through the entire logical structure. And so part of the state of what's going on is encapsulated in a coroutine runtime state. And that works pretty well for Sentinels. That sort of complexity wasn't necessary for the last couple games. And it's also, it's easy to follow the logic flow in that case, because you can just write the card's logic in one sort of place. And the way coroutines work, if stuff interrupts and flows through, it doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about keeping state and reacting to stuff later most of the time, because it's just sort of part of the execution flow. But it ends up being overkill for what we're doing with these games. So we had a new idea for Bottom of the Ninth, and we've been going that way. So sorry if that was a little complicated. You can learn more about that. I think we've done past dev streams about Sentinels and about Bottom of the Ninth, and you can learn more about those things. So check out our older dev streams about that. But yeah, that's going to be the end of the stream now. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.